We're going to go through how to mark your identifying variables section in your experiment planner. If you can't identify variables, you really can't do the rest of the experiment because you can't plan a hypothesis and you can't write up your tables and graphs, and you most definitely can't talk about your discussion properly if you cannot identify the variables that you're changing and measuring and controlling. So you were introduced to the idea of independent variable and dependent variables for fair testing. In other words, we change something and we see if it has an effect on something else that we are measuring. Your independent variable is one you change. Your dependent variable is definitely what you're measuring. And then you have control variables, things that need to keep either the same or they need to be completely removed, because if they change as well as what you're changing here, they're going to stuff up your dependent variable. Okay, so a really good example is in the crystal prac here. If we're looking to see if how fast it cools has an effect on crystal size, we don't then want to have different volumes of the solution in one petri dish compared to the other. Because of course, if I've got a little bit of solution in one petri dish and a lot in the other, the one that's got the most solution is of course going to grow a bigger crystal because there's more solution to grow it from. So that's something that needs to be controlled so that it doesn't affect what you're measuring. Now when it comes to marking our variables, it's quite simple. Can you identify your independent and dependent variable first? Can you identify variables to control? And can you tell me how you're going to control them? And last but not least, can you tell me how to measure accurately? Let's go to the mark sheet. Here I've got a picture of it color-coded. The very first thing you need to do for a C level is you need to be able to identify the variable to be changed and controlled and measured. So the one that we're changing is your independent variable, the measured is your dependent variable, and controlled is of course your control variables. So if you can't identify all three of those, you don't get a C. So I've color-coded it here to show what you need to do. First of all, can you identify what is the independent variable? And not just that we want the groups that we have, like I have a fast cool group and a slow cool group. I want to know the big picture thing here. It's cooling speed that we're changing, and it falls into two groups in this case, cooling fast or cooling slow. The thing that we're measuring, your dependent variable, is the crystal size. So I've got both of them here. And last but not least, can you show me some variables that we have to control? And that's this column here on your planning sheet. Are you able to give me at least 3 variables that I need to either keep the same or completely remove, because otherwise they're going to stuff up my measurements? Now if you want to then improve your mark and move up to a B level, then you need to add in a few other things. For this one you have to look at how variables are changed and how you're going to measure to get reliable data. So I've put them in 2 colors here. The very first one is, have you met all C-level criteria first? You have to meet that, otherwise you can't go up. Next, how to control some of the variables for a fair test. This column here is where you write these. How are you going to control them? For each one of the ones you've put on this side here, you must tell me how you're going to either remove them or how you're going to keep them the same in order to make sure that they are not going to affect your dependent variable size. So in the case of the amount of solution, if we measure half the solution into each petri dish, they've both got the same amount of solution to grow crystals with, it's not going to affect their size. So as long as you can put that down for about 3 or more control variables, you can tick that off. Last but not least, how I can measure it. You actually have to talk about what you're going to do to measure this properly so that you get some good data. Now you have to talk about it just generally for a B. You must talk about it in detail for an A, which you'll look at in a minute. That's the big difference between a B and an A. So for a B level here I've got this. I'm measuring the crystal size with the same ruler. I'm telling the reader what instruments I'm going to use so that I can actually measure it and know what they use to get their data. Now, to move from there up to an A, I have to go a bit further. I have to talk about how I'm going to measure so that I can get accurate data. Now, that's a little bit harder. In order to get accurate data, you have to talk about what instrument you're using and how you're going to use it in detail, and also possibly what type of errors that might occur if you misuse that instrument. So in the case of using a ruler, how are you going to use that instrument to accurately measure your data? You're not just going to use a ruler. You're going to say something along the lines, take multiple measurements, always make sure you're looking at the ruler straight on, not from the side, things like that to say how you're going to get accurate data. Now, if you want to go even further than that, you can also talk about the type of error that you are going to have if you don't do what you're saying above. So in the case of not looking at it directly in line with the ruler, not taking multiple measurements, well, you're allowing human error to slip in there, because how are you going to know they haven't made a mistake if you don't have them measure it over and over again to check they can get the same result? If you don't look at it straight on so it's not at an angle, how do you not know that they were actually getting the right number when they read the ruler? That's called human error, accidental mistakes that can affect your results. If you want to actually go further into the types of error to discuss them, look in chapter 1 of your textbook so that you can discuss the types of error that's out there and add them in to improve your marks if you're already near an A level. So that's marking your variable table in a nutshell.